Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Moaning. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Heya, how you doing? And if you're into the history of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, maybe you're just into the mythology, maybe you have just been watching this Iliad series here on YouTube and you wanted to know about book 7, well then this is the place for you. So you guys are going to want to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future if you haven't already. I beg everybody to constantly hit that subscribe button. So if you're one of the people who still hasn't done that, this is now your chance to do it. I would very much appreciate it. So as you guys do that, we're just gonna roll into book 7 of Homer's Iliad. So if I could summarize book 7 into a sentence, it would be that Hector and Ajax have a duel, but it ends up in a draw because they're both beasts. Yes, that is actually the famous part of this book too. That very rarely happens, that the most important thing to me is the most famous part of the book. So that is the most important part that happens in book 7 in an academic sense as well. Also, before we get started, I just want to note that my top is the exact same color as my wall, so I must look like a floating head right now on YouTube. But I also don't want to change because I haven't worn this top in literally a year on the channel, so I felt like it would be a nice change. But yeah, let's just roll into book 7. So book 7 picks up literally where book 6 left off. So if you haven't watched that episode, if you haven't read book 6 of the Iliad, I highly suggest that you do. Obviously, I cannot force you to do anything. So if you just need to read this book for class and you're like, man, f it, then fine. But once again, it literally plays right off of the last line of book 6. So it will just make a lot more sense if you do it that way. But either way. So literally the narrative picks up right when we left Paris and Hector. And they are walking back into battle with the Trojans. Then all of the Trojans literally start massacring the Greeks. It is a bloodbath out there. I'm not going to be going into every single death because just why would I do that? And just so that you know, if you start that book, it is just an absolute outpour of Greek bodies on the battlefield. Now Athena sees all of these deaths happening and she is obviously not happy because she's on the side of the Greeks. So she goes down to Troy where she finds Apollo and she wants to have a word with him. She wants to be like, yo, what the hell is up with all this shit? But when she gets down there, Apollo is ready to speak to her. And Apollo is like, hold up, I got something to say. So he puts forward the idea to Athena that what they should do is they should get a one-on-one battle going again with the Greeks and the Trojans. So he says, I actually really like Hector. I think that Hector should be the one to start this battle and we should let him choose which Greek he wants to fight. So he's like, that is my idea. If you want to go with it, I highly suggest that you do because it would make this a lot easier if you're just agreeing. And Athena's like, you know what? I actually don't see a problem with this plan. So I actually agree with it. I think that we should have somebody tell Hector for him to stop the fighting and to choose a Greek to fight of his own. Now, this has already happened literally a couple of hours ago, right? Bear in mind, at the beginning of this day, we had the fight between Menelaus and what's his face? Paris. Of course I couldn't remember his name. It's totally irrelevant. So we've already had this one-on-one duel, which did not go well. It did not work out. I don't know why they think it's gonna work out this time, but either way, that's exactly what they think. So Helenos, who I have mentioned him in book 6, right? So Helenos goes to speak to his brother Hector, and he's like, hey, do you want to do me this favor? I've been speaking to the gods, and actually they say that you're not fated to die on this day, which is really great. So you're not fated to die right now, which is important because what I would really like you to do is I'd really like you to go and do this one-on-one battle with the Greeks. If you so feel inclined, that would be helpful. And Hector's thrilled by this news. He's like, I'm ready to step up to the plate. Hell yes. So Hector goes and he stands in front of all the Trojans and quiets them all down as they're fighting. And he's like, guys, sit. And all the Trojans sit. And Agamemnon sees this happening and Agamemnon's like, well, I should probably do the same thing. So he goes in front of all the Greeks and he's like, Greeks, sit. And all the Greeks sit. It literally... This scene reminds me of being in school and having the principal walk in and be like, okay, students, could you please sit down now because I'm about to give a speech. And then all the students sit down. That's literally what this reminds me of because they're in the middle of the battlefield and all of the guys just sit. Anyways, as they're all sitting down, Apollo and Athena take on the form of vultures because they also want to watch this duel, right? They want to watch this one-on-one battle. So they go and they sit on a branch and they're watching. And Hector stands up to give his little speech, right? So he stands up in front of the Greeks and he's like, hey dudes, this is the plan, right? So I want to just kind of settle this thing. I'm really tired, again, really tired of this battle. So I'm going to go into battle with one of you, just one of you, okay? And actually, I'm going to leave it up to you guys. So he lets the Greeks choose who's going to fight him. But he does put forward the rules of the duel. Obviously, there are rules to the duel. There always are rules to the duel. So his rules are that whoever kills whoever, that side wins, right? That's a given, okay? So that's one of the rules. And the second one is that he says when the person dies, the other person, the opponent, is allowed to pick up the armor, and no one is allowed to come in and try and steal it. Like, that is their right. They killed that person, they can take that armor. Whoever on the Greek side can take it back to the ships, and he's going to take it to their temple of Apollo because he says that that's the god that would be on their side and blah, blah, blah. But along with that, though, the person of the other side is not allowed to take the body. So the body must be given to the side that that person is from. So if Hector dies, then the Trojans can take his body. And if whoever on the Greek side ends up dying, the Greeks can take their body in order to give them the correct and respectful burial rites. So those are the rules of the duel. And all of the Greeks hear this and they're sort of nodding in approval, but no one says anything. So that's important, that none of them get up. Not a single one of them gets up to volunteer themselves. Now, Homer does note that there is a combination of shame because they don't want to leave him hanging, like that's super disrespectful, but at the same time, they are terrified of Hector. Hector is never written about in this book as just being like some warrior on the Trojan side. Like, he is scary, and the Greeks are scared of him, and none of them want to get up to battle him. And so this actually prompts Menelaus to stand up and to be like, excuse me, what the hell, guys? Like, one of you has to stand up. And before anybody starts hating on Menelaus in this moment, Menelaus was already part of the previous battle, so he really shouldn't have to stand up and do it again. But more importantly, he's injured. If we remember from the previous books, he actually got stabbed in the top of his leg by Pandarus, right? So he has that wound on his leg. This is not a man who is fit to fight. And yet when he gets up and he yells at everybody and calls them women instead of men, he says, I'll do it. If all of you are too much of a wuss, I'll get up and fight. Which prompts his brother Agamemnon to stand up next to him and is like, are you joking? Hector is way better than you. You can't fight this man. Even Achilles is scared to fight this man. And that's something that's stressed. Like, Achilles is terrified of Hector. So if Achilles is scared, you can't get up and fight him. You're out of your bloody mind. Sit down. And so because of that, Menelaus does sit down, and all of his henchmen start like taking off the armor that he was trying to put on because they're like, good, you can't fight because you really shouldn't be. Thank you for the offer, but that's gonna be a no. So this reaction gets Nestor to stand up. So old man Nestor, he stands up and he's like, if Peleus knew that you guys were reacting this way, he would be so shamed and so upset. He had so much faith in you guys as heroes. Now, for context, Peleus is Achilles' dad, right? So Achilles' dad is too old to go to Troy, which is why Achilles goes. So Peleus, his father, stays home. Why the f didn't Nestor stay home if he's so old? Because the way that he ends this speech is by saying, I'm too old to get up and fight, but if I was younger, then I would have. And literally tells them of all of the like old wars that he had done and all the old battles that he had performed in as a way of like justifying, like, I've done my time, so I don't have to do this right now. But my question is constantly, why are you there? If you're too old, don't go. You are but a hindrance to the rest of the army. And he's literally, guys, he's the only old man there. Because if you think about it, Priam, who's the king of the Trojans, he's too old to fight. So he's not on the battlefield. He's up at the gates. He's up on the walls. He's chatting to Helen. He's doing his little social thing. All of the other elders, right? The 5 other elders that sit with him, they're also too old to fight. So what do? They sit down, they hang out, probably have a cup of coffee, a cappuccino maybe. Obviously not, I'm just like joking. But, you know, they're just hanging about. All of these other old people do not go into battle, and yet Nestor is there, and all he does is he yells at the Greeks. And what's surprising about this is that even though he says that he can't fight, but he's gonna yell at the Greeks anyways, this apparently is enough for some of the Greeks to be like, oh, Nestor has a point. How? Why? What? Am I the only one who's reading Nestor this way? I mean, regardless, 9 of the Greeks then stand up, right? So we've got Agamemnon, both Ajaxes, Idomeneus, Meriones, Diomedes, Theos, who's one that, or Theos, I don't really know how to say it, but he's a guy who is not usually focused on in the Iliad, but he's got a good death count, I must say. Oh, and the other guy who's got a good death count, who is also written about as Eurypylos. He also stands up. He's the 8th one to stand up in this moment. And Odysseus stands up. Did I already say Odysseus? I don't remember. I don't think I already said Odysseus. But either way, those are the 9 people who stand up in this moment. So Nestor sees all of them. He's like, cheers, guys. Thanks for actually doing something. That's great. And he gives them all lots to like mark, and then puts all of the lots in Agamemnon's helmet and they shake it up. Now, before I continue, all of the people on the Greek side start praying, okay? So as the lots are being shaken, they all start praying that Big Ajax will be pulled from the lots. And if Big Ajax is not pulled from the lots, then they really hope that Diomedes is pulled from the lots, because I think we've got the best chance of beating Hector with those two. Now, the reason why I just want to stop for a moment, because I don't think I've explained that there are two Ajaxes in this book. So two Ajaxes, one is big and one is little. Literally, if you say that to a classicist, if you say that to a classics person, like, oh, I really like Big Ajax in the Iliad, they will know exactly who you're talking about, right? So one is literally big and one is smaller than Big Ajax. Little, big. That's how we differentiate between them. They do have proper names. So Big Ajax is the most important one. I'll address Little Ajax when he comes up later. So Big Ajax is from Salamis. He is Ajax Telamon. So that is just, I just thought that I would explain that because I am not going to be saying Ajax Telamon for the duration of this series. I will just be saying Big Ajax and Little Ajax, because it's easier for me and everyone knows who I'm talking about. Either way, back to the action. So Nestor pulls out Big Ajax's lot, though, and he shows it to all of the Greeks. He's like, whose lot is this? Who marked this one? And Ajax is like, I did. And everybody's like, oh, thanks, sweet baby Jesus. So Ajax throws his lot on the ground because he's like, hell yeah, that's my lot. I'm gonna fight. And he tells all of the Greeks that as he's putting on his armor, he asks that they pray to Zeus in silence, though. He's like, do it quietly, because we need to pray that I have a better chance of winning this duel, but I don't want the Trojans to hear. But if you want to do it out loud, I mean, I guess that we have like nothing to lose. Like, you might as well do it out loud so that the Trojans can hear you. I have a question. Anybody who's watching, you can answer this in the comments below. That Ajax is saying, please pray in silence so that the Trojans don't hear you. But they were all just having a joint conversation and Homer didn't tell us that they went anywhere. So I presume that they can hear Ajax telling everyone, hey guys, pray in silence. What? Once again, am I the only person who reads this scene this way? Regardless, the Greeks sort of do a middle ground where they just start like murmuring their prayers and they're like, oh, I hope that Ajax is okay, as opposed to like really saying it out loud or like really saying it in silence as sort of like this happy medium, which like I vibe with. That's fine. And the Trojans can probably see and they're probably like, dude, what the f? That is so rude. Regardless of how the Trojans are reacting, though, we get this really great description of why Big Ajax is known as Big Ajax. And he's described when he's putting on his armor as being like Ares, the god of war. Amazing comparison. He is also described as the wall of the Greeks. Okay, this man is so big that he is the wall. Throughout this book and by book, I don't actually mean this chapter, throughout this whole story, he's described as like a tower. Like, that's how he's described. He is Ajax, like a tower. So he's a huge guy. Like, that's why we call him Big Ajax. He is physically humongous. He's also super hot because there's a description of him with like his brows like low, but he's got like this smile because he's like all ready for battle. And then he like strides in because he's all ready to meet Hector. And honestly, every single girl gets a little bit overwhelmed when we describe Ajax because he is just very large, very attractive, very much like stereotypical, like tall, dark, and handsome. That's totally not important to this scene though, but I just thought that I would throw that in. But anyways, Hector is on the battlefield. He's scared as he sees Ajax taking these giant strides towards him. But because he's the one that, you know, presented the duel, he can't like run away. So he's standing there, he's full of this pride, being like, I don't know why I said that, but now that I've said it, I can't run away. And I'm really scared because Ajax is big and he's terrifying. So they then come to the middle and they're gonna like finally do their battle. Like, this is a really famous scene, guys. Ajax strolls into battle where he strolls up to Hector, and instead of just starting off by being like, let's go, he actually begins by being like, hey, so I'm here only really because Achilles isn't here, because Achilles is still in his tent because he's mad at Agamemnon. So that's why I'm here. And we can totally fight, but I just wanted to remind you that Achilles lives. He's still alive. He's in the Greek camp. And really, that's just in there to remind you as the reader and to remind everybody in the book that Achilles is still present. He's just still having his strop. We're now on book 7. Achilles is still moping in the Greek camps. And you're like, wow, I forgot that I was annoyed with him. Now I'm reminded that I'm annoyed with him. But I mean, it's good because in this way, because Ajax gets this time to shine, which like, big fan of. So Ajax then says, I'm ready to fight. This is how we should do it. And Hector is like, don't you dare tell me all the things of warfare that I should be doing. And instead he like lists off all the things that he is really good in warfare to Ajax, being like, I'm good at this, I'm good at that, I'm good at blah, blah, blah. And then he turns around, he fires his first spear at Ajax, and you're like, yes, boy. But Ajax's shield is like hella thick, right? This thing is huge. I mean, what you guys should know is that there's like a layer of bronze, and then behind it, there's like like 7 layers of ox hide behind this stupid thing. When you hear that description, it's like, how could anybody ever defeat Ajax? Like with a shield like that. Hector fires the spear anyways, and it goes into the shield, but it doesn't go all the way through like we've had it, because I don't know how anybody would do that. Honestly, I don't think that's a reflection of Hector as a warrior. That is a reflection of how thick Ajax's shield is. So that happens, and Ajax is like, wah! And then he turns around and he fires his own spear at Hector. And the same thing kind of happens that we have seen before with Paris, where it goes through Hector's shield, and it does go through his like corselet and his tunic, his armor, but it doesn't hit him. He sort of swerves out of the way, sort of in the way that Paris did once again. So it just goes through his clothing and not actually into him. It was a close one. Now this part of the duel does bother me, because all of a sudden they both have their spears again, which like we weren't told when they picked them up, because presumably the spear is now past the person. But either way, they both have their spears again, and they fire at each other again. So Hector throws again at Ajax. His spear does this time hit Ajax's shield, and the tip actually bends rather than goes through it this time. I think he needs to change his tactic, but either way. So that happens on Hector's side, and then when Ajax throws his spear, he throws it a little higher. So he's trying to aim for more so like this sort of region on Hector, and Hector pulls up his shield to block. But the spear again goes right through Hector's shield. He's got 2 big ass holes in his shield. Somebody sub him a new one at this moment. It goes through his shield and actually slices right this like the side of his neck. So that's where the spear goes, and it does slice his neck open, so blood does come out of it. And Hector doesn't even notice. He's a bit like the honey badger in this moment. He's just like, don't really give a shit. That's fine. Keeps fighting. Instead, because he doesn't have a spear now, he picks up a rock and he chucks this rock at Ajax, which Ajax again dodges with the shield. It's like the boss level in Super Mario or something. Like, I don't know how you would defeat him with the shield, because he just blocks it. Not even a dent. It's just like, maha, sucker. Ajax then picks up an even bigger rock, because he's like, well, I'm just gonna do much better than Hector. Picks up a bigger rock, chucks it at Hector. Hector blocks it with his already issue of a shield compared to Ajax's, and it dents because the rock is thrown with such force. Like, Ajax put all of his weight behind this thing, and it hits Hector's shield, and it actually is so strong, the force is so strong that he stumbles backwards, and Apollo comes down to like make sure he doesn't fall over and like stand him upright. Both of them in this moment take out their swords, and they start engaging in like really close combat, and it is getting deadly. Now 2 heralds in this moment stand up, and that is the only reason why the 2 of them stop fighting, because from the Greek side we have Talthybius, who I've mentioned before. He stands up, and on the Trojan side, oh god, how do you say his name? It's Idaios. Idaios? I don't know. You know what? That's his name. I can remember off the top of my head. I can spell it. I just don't know. Adaios. Someone tell me in the comments. He stands up on the Trojan side, and they both run in to stand in between the 2 of them, so they stop fighting. And both the heralds are like, hey, Zeus loves both of you equally, which stupid thing to say, but that's essentially what they say to them. And they're like, look, it's nighttime. Both of you should just pack it in, all right? It's getting dark. This is ridiculous. No one is winning anytime soon. They only just started, but whatever. Ajax is the first one to speak, and he says, look, Hector's the one that started this whole shindig, so it's really his call if we end it now or not. And Hector then says, yeah, you know what? It is nighttime. Also, you're a great spearman. I'm a little bit tired. I think that we should just like take a break. And Ajax is like, cool, that's totally fine. So in order for them to settle this whole duel, and for them to call a truce basically between them, to say like, we'll come back to this at some point when the gods, you know, have decided who's gonna win. We'll come back to this. But in the meantime, we should exchange gifts. So they exchange gifts. And Hector gives Ajax a sword, a belt, and a sheath. That's sort of all like one thing. So he gives that to Ajax, and then Ajax gives Hector a purple wool belt. That is how they exchange gifts, and then they call it a day, and then they go back to their respective armies. What's funny when they get back to their armies though is the different way that the armies like react to them coming back. So the Trojans react to Hector by like celebrating that he's still alive. They're like, oh my god, it's amazing, you made it out alive. Whereas when Ajax goes back to the Greeks, it's described that all of them are like celebrating his victory rather than like his truce with Hector, which is a little interesting to show you how the Greeks, or both armies, are reacting to both of these heroes after this whole like battle that they just did. But that's more analysis. Let's just keep explaining. So in the Greek camp, they're all having a feast in honor of Ajax, and Agamemnon has sacrificed like all of these oxes and all of this stuff in his honor, and they end up giving Ajax the best part of the meat to eat. They're just like, you earned it. And as they're eating, Nestor stands up and he says, look, a lot of people have died today. This has been a huge battle. Every battle scene, by the way, that I've described up until this moment has been one day. Nestor is like, look, loads of people have died. So once we're all finished up here, we should focus on getting all the bodies back, creating a pyre so that we can bury them, well, burn them all appropriately, and then give the bones to whoever needs to take them back to their family so that they can be buried correctly there. That's what Nestor says. He also says, whilst we're at it, we have these like walls that we built around the camp just in case. We should really build like a ditch outside of it because I feel like that ditch is gonna really help us. So we should do that whilst we're at it too. And all the Greeks are like, yeah, that actually sounds like a solid plan. So that's what they're gonna do after dinner. At the same time, the Trojans are also having a little assembly about what they're gonna do. So Antenor, the rude guy, the guy who was really rude to Helen, I'm pretty sure this is the same Antenor. So he gets up and he's like, hey, I've got a really great plan. Today did not go very well on the battlefield. I don't see it getting any better anytime soon. So what we should do is just give Helen back. That's my 2 cents. This is what I think we should do. He follows that up by also saying that Paris should give back all of the stuff that he stole from Sparta when he also took Helen. Like he took a lot of stuff. And so he's like, you should also be giving that back as well as Helen because we cannot win this. Antenor is like, this is not going to go well. Paris, this is what you should do. And then he sits down. And so Paris stands up and Paris is like, yeah, so that doesn't sound like something I want to do. And I know that you can come up with better plans than that. So I think you should get thinking again. But if you really believe that I was going to give Helen back, the gods have made you crazy because that gal, mine, not giving her back. But I will give back the stuff. That's a fine compromise. I'll go and do that. So he sits down. Priam stands up. The king Priam stands up. And Priam is like, okay, since Paris just agreed to that, we're just going to lock that in right there. So we're going to have Ajaxs? I-D-A-I-O-S. Someone tell me Ajaxs, whatever. So he's like, we're gonna get that guy to run over to the Greek camp and tell them that Paris is gonna give the stuff back if they want it. So that's what we're gonna do. I also want to highlight in this moment that Priam again blames Paris. He says that the reason why the Trojan War started, the reason why all of their strife has begun is because of Paris. So that is also done again in this book. He sits down, they all eat, they all sleep. I'm so sorry guys, I just hit the camera. Oh my goodness, so if the angle changes, I don't even know if it really did, but I'm sorry either way. So the next day at the arse crack of dawn, like literally the sun is like just coming up and Ajaxs, I'm just making it up at this point. This guy, he gets up and he runs his little booty over to the Greek camp, right? So he's gonna go and relay all the information that we just heard. He relays everything that Priam said, and then he basically finishes by just, reminding them and reminding us that the main thing is that Paris is willing to give back all of the gifts that he stole from Sparta. He's like, you guys can have all of that. Paris is willing, just not willing to give up Helen. But aside from that, you can have everything else. As expected though, the Greeks reply with like silence. Everybody's a bit like, the f did this guy run all the way over here this early in the morning to tell us this? But they don't actually say anything. And actually the only man to say anything is Diomedes. He's the first man to stand up. And he literally looks at this messenger and he just goes, yeah, no, that's gonna be a no from us. We don't want his stuff. Which is just peak Diomedes. That's exactly what I would have written him to say as well. Like, that's just, oh man. And all the Greeks roar in approvals. They always do. They roar in approval in this moment. They're like, yeah, Diomedes, you tell him. And before the messenger can reply, then we have Agamemnon stand up and Agamemnon is like, you heard the man, you heard what he had to say. But actually on the topic of the whole, like, you wanting to bury your dead people and all of that sort of shebang, yeah, we can accommodate for that. So you can go back to Troy, tell Priam he has time to bury all of his dead before we resume battle, before we resume war. Which is a very mature response. I have to give everybody credit where credit is due. Agamemnon's response is super mature, and so then the messenger runs back to Troy and he tells them all what the Greeks have said, where it's basically like, ha ha ha, yeah, Diomedes says that your stuff is shit and he doesn't want it anyways, like that's not why they're here. They really just want Helen and they want glory in battle, but we can bury our dead. And so all the Trojans are like, great, and they start gathering up all of their like dead people and they start, identifying all the dead people. Homer literally like walks us through this moment, and the Greeks start doing the same thing. So they start doing their whole single funeral pyre thing that they were speaking about, and digging the ditch. They do start doing that. So the ditch thing that they had wanted to do, they're now gonna do that. While this is all happening, we then cut to Olympus. So we finally cut back to the gods. I feel like it's been a hot second since we've seen like proper god action. And this is the first time that we meet Poseidon. We're now book 7 and we finally meet the god of the sea. So Poseidon is up there hanging out with Zeus, and they're both watching like the mortals do all their weird like sacrifice thing and all of this sort of shebang. And Poseidon is the first to speak. He actually stops Zeus and he's like, yo dude, look at the Greeks. Have you noticed how they're building this ditch and not once have they mentioned either of us? What the f is that shit about? That's hella disrespectful. And Zeus says, you know what, you're right man, that's actually super shady. You know what? If you want permission to go down and to fill that little ditch they're digging with like silt and sand and all of that, if you want to tear down their walls, if you want to just cause havoc, you can go do that. I say that's okay, man. You have the all clear from me. That's the only moment that we see with the gods there, because immediately now we cut back to everybody down, you know, chilling. We cut back down to the Greek camp and they're sort of finishing up their day. They then go to have a meal. And actually in this moment, we actually get notice of Jason's son. So the great hero Jason, he has a son. His son he had with this woman called Hypsipyle, which is spelled like this. That is a name and a half. But Hypsipyle is the daughter of Dionysus and Ariadne's son. So just for context, totally not important to the action. But this guy, Jason's son, is also Dionysus's great-grandson, which is pretty cool. That's like a very cool little moment, which I like to highlight cool moments in this series, but yes, so that's just one of them. But he had sent over all this wine from Lemnos, so the Greeks are now drinking that wine. That's really why I mentioned it. So they're all drinking that wine, and then suddenly in the middle of it, you know, Zeus is like, he's doing his whole like threatening thing from Olympus, and all of the Greeks start feeling this like impending doom, and they start feeling like scared as basically, because they know that Zeus is somewhere plotting. And so then sort of in the same moment, they all start pouring out their wine and making an offering to Zeus, probably realizing that they had forgotten because Zeus is pissed off with it. So like, yeah, they do that and then they go to bed, and that's the end of the book. Ta-da! That's the end of book 7. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And next week we'll be giving you book 8 of our little Iliad series here on YouTube. So cheers guys, we'll see you then.